Since its invention, the TV has been just that, a TV. But what if it could be something more? Meet Samsung Vision AI. Whether it's upscaling classic content to look brand new or translating an English broadcast subtitles to Spanish in real time, Samsung Vision AI helps you get more from TV than you ever thought possible. Redefine what it means to watch TV with Samsung Vision AI. Visit Samsung.com to learn more. Vision AI features vary by model. Upscaling utilizes AI-based formulas and results may vary based on source content. Translation accuracy not guaranteed.
Saks Off Fifth. Up to 70% off every day. Spring is in full swing here at Saks Off Fifth, with so many exciting trends to try. From matching sets and floral dresses to wide-leg jeans and chic accessories, find all of the season's must-have styles. Plus, shop new designer arrivals weekly. Find Gucci, Valentino Garavani, Versace, Stuart Weitzman, and more. Head to SaksOffFifth.com or a Saks Off Fifth store near you for up to 70% off every day.
You're listening to DNA ID, brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime, Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective,
and Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
It was 1991. 36-year-old Michael McC. was driving around Akron, Ohio, looking for scrap metal he might be able to sell to boost his limited cash supply. He turned onto Weller Avenue and scanned the sides of the road. As he drove east, he saw something burning in the street up ahead. He pulled up and stopped his Buick LeSabre. The object in flames on the right side of the road was a dummy, Michael thought. Right? Nope, not a dummy. A horrified Michael realized he was looking at a burning body. He pulled a U-turn and zipped a quarter-mile down the street to Fred's Diner. He ran in and asked to use the phone to call the police. It was Sunday, March 30th, the day before Easter, and the time was 7:52 a.m. Officer Larry McCain of the Akron Police responded immediately and followed Michael to the location where he'd seen the person ablaze in the street. As McCain drove up at 7:57 a.m., he could see the small fire Michael had reported. A burning body lay face up in the roadway east of 795 Weller Avenue. It was a woman, and her arms were stretched out to the sides. Flames 8 to 10 inches high leapt from the woman's torso and head. It was clear that she was deceased, and Officer McCain allowed the flames to burn themselves out. The victim was naked from the waist down. Her upper body clothing was open so her bare chest was exposed. Several stab wounds were visible in her chest, and a slash was evident on her throat. Her right hand lay on the curb, and her left hand extended out into the street. She had no identification on her or anywhere nearby. Officer McCain radioed for help at 7:58 a.m. Sergeant William Wright responded immediately, and two detectives whose names I can't read because the original incident report is so blurry, arrived at 8:15. The body was still smoldering, although the flames were out. The original incident report says, quote, "It appeared some type of accelerant had been poured on the upper body and been ignited and had burned for some time before it was found," end quote. The county prosecutor also arrived to view the horrific scene firsthand. Coroner Dr. Cox pronounced the young woman dead at 9:15 and supervised as the body was bagged and transported to the coroner's office. On the ground, near where she had lain, Detective Clem found two things in the burn patch. One was a hoop earring with dangling crosses on it, and one was a set of keys, with 3 keys on a heart-shaped key fob, engraved with, "He who holds the key can unlock my heart." The OG incident report by Detective H.G. Clem describes the burning woman as a white female, approximately 5 foot 2 inches tall, with reddish-brown hair, about 130 pounds. Detective Clem interviewed Michael, who found the body, in Officer McCain's cruiser, and then let him leave. Michael could not tell Clem what he needed to know, who the dead woman was. The victim arrived at the coroner's office wrapped in a white sheet and orange crash bag. The pathologist's notes recorded her as a white female, aged 17 to 25, 135 pounds, 5.225 inches tall, reddish-brown hair, brown eyes. She was nude from the waist down. She had 2 small but distinctive homemade tattoos, a cross on the middle finger of her left hand and a heart with an arrow through it on the outer left ankle. Her clothing was badly burned, but the less damaged remnants were identifiable as a gray tweed waist-length jacket with red and blue threads, a black sweater with red, white, and silver metallic stitching, and a black tank top, and a white long-sleeve shirt. A large link metallic gold bracelet about 3/8 of an inch wide was on her right wrist. She was also wearing a large gold dog collar type necklace, approximately 3/4 of an inch wide, around her throat. She wore a chain belt around her waist. The woman's torso, neck, and head were severely burned, from the left elbow all the way over to the right arm. The body exhibited extensive charring that exposed the deep underlying connective tissues, primarily on the right side of her torso and neck. The left side of her face was less badly burned than the right. The left was still possibly identifiable by someone who knew her. Her chest bore 9 stab wounds. Once the pathologist took a close look at the body of the young woman, he noticed that her throat had been slashed on the left side. Notes from the scene and the autopsy conclude that the body had been dragged face down to where she was found. Contusions and abrasions were evident on her face, thighs, toes of both feet, knees, and buttocks. Bruises were noted that on both wrists that pointed to restraints, and bruising on various spots on the body indicated a beating. Someone had brutalized this young woman in a horrific case of overkill. Fingertip-shaped bruises on her inner thighs also pointed to a possible sexual assault, one that seemed nearly definite since responding officers had also noted bleeding from the victim's vagina at the scene. The autopsy on the victim was attended by Akron Police Detective C. Snyder. He used a magnified laser and UV light on the body to locate fibers and hairs that were collected into evidence. This from Detective Snyder's report, quote, "Through the use of the alternative light sources, a fluorescence of an unknown source was observed on victim's abdomen and legs. The fluorescence resembled a pore or splash-type pattern. This area was sampled, and a possible collection was attempted with sterile, wet swabs," end quote. Fire investigator Lieutenant Gary Cox used a sampling device to check for flammable vapors on the body and clothing. He determined that a large amount of accelerant had been used on the clothing. The burned remnants even smelled like a petroleum byproduct to the observers. Lieutenant Cox took samples of the clothing and placed them inside a metal can to submit them to the lab in hopes of determining the nature of the substance. It was not until years later that modernized testing was able to shed some light on this. Then Dr. Cox began the autopsy itself. The cause of death was blood loss due to stabbing, and the manner of death was homicide. The stab wounds to the young woman's chest area had nicked her ribs and penetrated her liver, lungs, and heart. Her liver and kidneys were ruptured as well from some kind of sustained and extensive blunt trauma to the lower abdomen. The police concluded it was likely she'd been repeatedly kicked. Her vaginal and rectal area displayed visible injury, so Dr. Cox collected swabbings and slides of these areas, as well as pubic hair clippings. Even though it was only 1991, Detective Snyder's report indicates an awareness that DNA could possibly be found. Indeed, the vaginal and pubic hair samples later showed the presence of semen, a known source of DNA. The murder weapon was believed to be a knife, one without a hilt, about 1.5 inches wide, with a non-serrated edge and both edges sharpened. The pathologist noted a lack of defensive wounds on the young woman, and the bruises on her wrists were the likely explanation. She'd been bound and unable to use her hands. Nonetheless, her fingernails were clipped and retained in evidence. The next step, detectives' notes indicate, was to issue a description of the young woman to the media in hopes that someone would recognize her tattoos or physical description and identify her. It worked. On March 31st, just a day after the body was found, the newspapers ran a small piece about the Jane Doe who had been set on fire on Weller Avenue. Detective Bruce Van Horn received a phone call at 10:15 a.m. from a Shelley P., age 23. Shelley said her sister-in-law, Georgia, had called her and said she was worried after seeing the piece in the newspaper about an unidentified woman who was found murdered. This was because Georgia was babysitting the 3-year-old child of her and Shelley's former sister-in-law, Rachael Johnson. Rachael had gone out the night before and had never come home. She and a friend had left to go out to a bar and left Rachel's daughter, Caitlin, with her father, Georgia's brother. Rachael never came back to pick up her daughter. Georgia told Shelley the description of the tattoos found on the Jane Doe as laid out in the newspaper, and Shelley knew it wasn't good. Her friend Rachael had had 2 homemade tattoos that met the description exactly. Detective Van Horn requested that Shelley come into the coroner's office. He showed her what the report says, quote, the tattoos that had been removed from the hand and ankle of the victim, end quote. Please tell me they did not show Shelley bits of cut-off flesh. Shelley identified the tattoos as Rachel's and also recognized the jewelry found on the body and the earring found near the body as belonging to her former sister-in-law. Dental records and x-rays from a recently broken ankle confirmed the identification. The dead woman was Rachael Johnson, age 23.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
Rachael Maureen Johnson was born on August 30th, 1967, to mother Gail Mann and father Lawrence Larry Johnson. Rachael grew up in Akron and attended East High School. She had recently moved to Talmadge. Her mother, Gail, said that Rachael was incredibly thoughtful, taking care to purchase meaningful birthday presents. Quote, she would send me cards where she would try to sign her brother Larry's name like he might sign it, because she wanted me to think that Larry signed the card. Rachael's sister Layla was just 13 when 23-year-old Rachael was killed. As the Akron Beacon-Journal reported, Layla idolized her sister. Rachael often babysat Layla and would take her teenage sister to the drive-in movies and let her bring her friends over to hang out. Rachael was daring and encouraged Layla to come out of her shell. Layla said that Rachael paid her $1 to get on her first roller coaster because she just knew that she would love it. Layla found it terrifying. Regardless of their differences, Rachael just seemed so cool to the young teen. She said she was very fun-loving. If there was fun to be had, she was going to find it. Caitlin, Rachael's daughter, was just 3 years old. Rachael was devoted to her child and talked a lot to her friends at the bars on the last evening of her life about being excited to dye Easter eggs together that weekend. Caitlin's father was Thomas P., whose brother Mark was married to 23-year-old Shelley, the one who had called in the possible identification of her former sister-in-law, Rachael. Rachael and Thomas had a volatile relationship. Their friends and family said that when they weren't drinking, things were great. But when they partied, things went off the rails. The two were no longer living together. Rachael and Caitlin were now living in a tiny rental apartment at 853 Southeast Avenue in Talmadge. Thomas was living with his sister Anne on Indianola Avenue. The two had had a big blow-up in February, and Rachael told everyone that Thomas had kicked in her front door and assaulted her. She had gotten a new quick-set lock, and before she was definitively identified, Detective Van Horn and coroner's investigator P. Gillespie used a matching key in the set found near her body to unlock the door. They found a neat-as-a-pin apartment with no signs that anything suspicious had happened inside. They collected a piece of jewelry that matched the hoop earring with crosses on it that had been found by the body, and a check made out to Rachael as circumstantial evidence that she was the Jane Doe called in by Shelley, until they received more scientific identification. Shelley told the investigators that Rachael had been laid off from University Rubber Company the previous Monday. She said Rachael liked to go out and have fun and hang out at the bars in the area like the Roosevelt on Darrow. She wore what Shelley described as mod clothing with miniskirts and heavy jewelry. She liked metal bands. Rachael's friends and family said she loved spending time with her daughter, going to bars, listening to heavy metal music, and hanging out with her friends. After her death, Thomas got custody of his daughter, Caitlin. Okay, back to the initial crime scene. Detectives Clem and Metz, along with uniformed patrol officers, conducted a search of the area surrounding where the body was found. They walked the entire length of Weller Avenue, which is the southern street on a U-shaped triptych of streets. Weller terminated on its west end at the main road, Home Avenue. The eastern end terminated at the bottom of the U and turned into Young Street, heading north. Weller housed an odd mix of industrial, commercial, and one or two small residential structures. One entire side of the street had a chain-link fence running the length of it. I'm reading here a description of the location from a terrific article in the Akron Beacon-Journal, dated March 8, 1992. Quote, Rachael was set afire in a place where no one should have to finally rest. She was found in a bleak, uninhabited section of Weller Avenue in North Akron. The ground where she was dumped was a landscape of battered, rusted guardrails, a huge mound of gravel, and a few barren, lifeless trees. A lime green sign about 100 feet from where the body was found reads, "No dumping," end quote. The investigators checked a wooded area abutting Young Street. Past that lay the railroad tracks, which were checked for clues as well. They checked a parking lot on the south end of Weller that belonged to a business there. Akron police investigators ensured that the crime scene was documented in photos and a 2-scale drawing of the area surrounding the burn spot. This spot was on the south side of the road, 75 feet west of where Weller intersected with Young Street. There were no houses immediately near where the body was dumped. In the grid searching of the surrounding areas, nothing was found that was of evidentiary value. Detective Van Horn conducted a neighborhood canvass asking if anyone had seen anything. The investigators suspected that the young woman had been stabbed and slashed to death elsewhere, but she'd been set alight once she'd been dumped in the road. There was no way a body was dumped in the road, saturated with an accelerant and set afire without someone noticing, right? Well, yes and no. Fred Tausch, who lived at 795 Weller, told the officers he got into his car to go to Fred's diner for breakfast around 7:45 Saturday morning. As he drove east on Weller, he saw something smoking in the road, but he didn't look closely. He really didn't give it much thought, he said, because it wasn't the first time people had burned garbage in the street. Another neighbor, Georgette Lafferty, told the officers she heard a car running outside her house early that morning, but she didn't get up to check it out. It wasn't an uncommon occurrence. The canvas told the investigators that the area of Weller and Young, where there was a manufacturing plant, was commonly used as a dumping ground for trash and was also used by teenagers as a place to park and hook up. Even though it was off the beaten path, it was the kind of place a local would probably know about. An employee of the gas station on nearby East Talmadge Avenue, Juanita Kelly, got to work at 6 on Saturday morning. She told the officers that a man came in early and put a $5 bill down for gas, but he only pumped about $1.62 worth, which is a totally random number. He came inside and got his change. Juanita did not see whether this guy put the $1.62 worth of gas into his car or into some kind of portable container. Of course, this was interesting to the investigating officers because their quarry probably was someone who only needed a small amount of gasoline to serve as an accelerant. I looked it up, and in 1991, gas averaged $1.14 a gallon. So this guy pumped maybe 1.5 gallons. Definitely odd, although I remember as a broke teenager, I might have done that once or twice. Juanita was able to describe the gas customer as a white male, around 30 years old, 6 feet tall, of average build, with dark hair, short hair parted in the center. He was wearing a heavy plaid shirt and driving a boxy blue older model car. Notes were made. The police started to put together a timeline of Rachel's last movements. On Friday night, the 29th, Rachel had gone out to bars. She was picked up by her girlfriend, Kimmy R., and Kimmy's boyfriend, Jeff A. They went to a bar called Night Tracks, a regular haunt of Rachel's, where 2 of her ex Thomas's siblings happened to see her. Kimmy and Rachel were having some beers when around 11:30 p.m., Rachel's really good friend from childhood, Lisa Moore, arrived. Lisa sat down and they all chatted and drank. When they were done there, Lisa and Rachel stopped at Roosevelt's bar to see if a guy they knew named Jimmy L. was there, but he wasn't. Lisa then drove them to another bar called L. Sid's on Talmadge Avenue, where a band Rachel liked called Eclipse was playing for a party someone was having. Rachel had about 4 beers there and danced with several men, including a guy named Jonathan H., who, she remarked, was very handsy. Rachel had also been drunkenly hitting on the bouncer, Lisa said. The 2 stayed until closing. They left the bar between 2:15 and 2:20 a.m. on Saturday morning. They got into Lisa's Chevy Malibu, and Lisa was driving Rachel home when they realized that the right rear tire was flat. Lisa had no spare, so they made the questionable decision to just drive on the flat tire to Lisa's house, which wasn't far but wasn't right next door either. The flat tire started making a burning rubber smell, and Rachel, who was very intoxicated, started to freak out. In her irrational state of mind, she became convinced the car was going to blow up, and nothing was going to change her mind. As they approached the large intersection of Dan Street, Faust Avenue, and East Glenwood Avenue, Rachel said she was going to get out of the car. They pulled up to the light, and Rachel said, quote, "I know someone that lives just off Dan Street. I'm getting out." Lisa protested, and Rachel shouted that she wasn't going to burn up in the car. Before Lisa could stop her, she jumped out of the vehicle. Lisa grabbed her by the back of the coat, but Rachel just knocked her hand away and started walking east through the Dairy Mart parking lot. This is all from the police report, quote, "At this time, a car with its bright lights on pulled up behind and then pulled into the lot where Rachel had walked and tooted its horn. Lisa looked over and remembers the car being a small gray car, both headlights working and being single round headlights. The car was a very faded gray, and there was no trim chrome or pinstriping that she could see. She believes the car only had a driver's side door window, and if there was a rear window behind the door, it was very small. Due to the glare of the lights, she could not see who was in the car or how many people. She stated she knows from experience there was no use trying to get Rachael to get back into her car. Also, Lisa had to get home to relieve her babysitter. So she turned left on Glenwood and drove home, arriving at 2:40 a.m. She did not think anything more about it until she saw the article in the paper about the tattoos." End quote. Well, Lisa personally had imprinted those tattoos on Rachael's skin when they were kids, and as soon as she saw the description, she knew it was her friend. Lisa was able to tell the investigators what clothes Rachael had been wearing on her bottom half: a clingy knit black miniskirt, no pantyhose, and black corduroy ankle boots. She also had on a unicorn bracelet with a chain attached to a ring. Lisa said Rachael carried no purse and kept her money, about $4, in her shoe. Detectives were very interested in the gray car Lisa had seen pulling into the Dairy Mart lot where Rachael was walking. I'm going to state up front here that although Lisa specifically told the investigators that she had not seen Rachael get into this car, the investigative theory that was adopted was that she did get into the vehicle. How else could she have ended up where she ended up a mile away? This theory became even more concrete when 2 City of Akron employees came forward who had seen the car pull up behind Lisa at the light and then pull into the Dairy Mart lot after Rachael had stormed out of Lisa's car and slammed the door. They, too, never saw Rachael get into the vehicle, but they assumed that they were witnessing some kind of domestic dispute, and Rachael and the 2 cars were all together. Lisa described the gray car she saw as looking like it was just primer paint, as if it needed a paint job. But it was shiny as though it had been waxed. It had very dark tinted front windows and no rear windows, so she thought it could have been an El Camino or something like that. The detectives took her on a drive around to see if by luck she could locate the car she saw in the parking lot honking its horn. She picked out several faded, matte gray cars, including a Ford Escort, a Dodge Omni, and a Colt, which the detectives noted and ran the plates for. They also issued a description of the car they were looking for, which was, of course, vague to the point of being useless. Detectives considered the idea that perhaps someone had sabotaged Lisa's tire. This would have been someone in the bar that night, someone who wanted to render the 2 women vulnerable. Police asked Lisa if there was any chance she and Rachael were being followed when they left the bar. Lisa said she was pretty sure not, because since they were both drinking, they were on the lookout for cops. But she also admitted that the car she was driving that night was missing its rearview mirror, so she really couldn't be certain. But there was no evidence of tampering with the tire. Instead, it seems that the flat tire was just bad luck that would turn tragic. Lieutenant Cox and Detective Stinson foot-searched the area of the Dairy Mart, including the parking lot, and spoke to an employee who had closed the store on Friday night. Tom Bishop said he closed the Dairy Mart at 1 and was in the store cleaning up and such until about 4. That's got to be one spick-and-span convenience store. Tom hadn't seen or heard anything unusual, even though, according to Lisa, a car had pulled into the lot when Lisa was walking through it around 2:30 a.m. and honked its horn. The investigators also noted the public payphones outside the store. It was possible, they thought, that Rachael had called someone to pick her up. Then the police found some witnesses who helped significantly tighten up the timeline for when Rachael was dumped on Weller Avenue. A Donald C. was working in the industrial building at the corner of Young and Weller. On Saturday morning, he and some coworkers went to Krispy Kreme and then drove to the industrial building at 7:15 a.m. They drove right by the spot where Rachael's body was found at 7:52 a.m., and there was nothing in the street and nothing burning. But as they were parked in the street waiting for another coworker, Donald looked in his rearview mirror and saw a dark blue, full-size, late 70s or early 80s sedan drive into the street westbound on Weller. A white male with a baseball hat was driving. He seemed to be watching Donald. The car continued driving off towards Home Avenue. Minutes later, when they drove away, Donald observed something burning in the street and thought it was trash. This from the report by Detective Van Horn, quote, "The flames were approximately 1.5 to 2 feet high, burning fast as Donald started to get back into the cab of his truck. He then walked to within 15 feet of the fire and observed what he thought was a mannequin with a hole in its throat that was made up to look like a body. He recalls looking at his watch and noticed it was 7:45, end quote. Mike McSee drove by just minutes later, and this time he called the police. A paperboy who was delivering papers that morning backed up this timeline. 14-year-old paperboy Jeremy B. was doing his route with his stepdad at Home and Faust at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday morning. They went northbound on Home and parked at the south edge of Weller. After they delivered the papers, they drove off. Jeremy said he was sure that if there was something lying in the road, he would have seen it, and his stepdad agreed. Lisa's description of the gray vehicle that had pulled into the Dairy Mart parking lot intrigued police when they interviewed the bouncer at El Cid's, who was working the door on Friday night when Rachael and Lisa arrived. His name was Lee Paul H. He remembered chatting with Rachael and checking her ID. His AMC Concord four-door was silver with paint peeling off the car. It, quote, gives the look of two different colors of paint, said the police report. He admitted to driving it on Friday night. He said Rachael and her girlfriend stayed until sometime around 2 a.m. After he closed the bar at 2:55, he went to Bob's Big Boy with several people from the bar. He went home and went to bed at 4:10 a.m. The bartender at El Cid's said she didn't know Rachael well, but she knew who she was. She said there were a lot of weird people in the bar that night because the band Eclipse was playing. Police appeared to have verified Lee Paul's alibi because he was dropped from the potential suspect list after a short time. Detective Arnett found another witness, a girl named Kelly Long, who was the girlfriend of David R., a friend of Thomas's, Rachel's ex. The two of them were in the Brooklands bar the night that Rachael was last seen there, and she noticed Rachel's pretty blouse. She was able to describe what Rachael was wearing, including her missing shoes, which were black ankle-high boots.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats NYX leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose NYX. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. NYX undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, NYX makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at NYX.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. NYX, for your leaks, for your life.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
The investigators set about looking at the usual suspects. Thomas P., Rachel's ex, was number one in their sights. A quick check of his record showed minimal law enforcement contact, with a record of misdemeanor drinking violations and nothing else. But the investigators were hearing from Rachel's friends that Thomas had assaulted her and she was afraid of him. For example, Cheryl Huey was the bartender at Night Track's Brooklyn's Cafe. She had become good friends with Rachel over the past 2 years. She said Rachel often unloaded on her about the problems she had with Thomas. And Thomas had often come into the bar in pursuit of Rachel and had beaten her up in front of other people several times. On the previous New Year's Eve, the beating was so bad that other men in the bar had to physically force Thomas to back off. Thomas was banned from the bar ever since, which is probably why Rachel went there so often. Another high school friend of Rachel's named Sue C. told the detectives that the problems Rachel was having with Thomas were well known. And Kimmy R., Rachel's friend and coworker who had picked her up and taken her to Night Track's Brooklyn's on the last night of her life, told Detective Arnett that Rachel told her and others at work that if anything ever happened to her, Thomas did it. They tracked down Thomas at his sister's place where he was living. I just have to say here that trying to make sense of Thomas's family as I read the case file was a challenge. His parents, Maureen and Mike, had 14 children. Thomas was one of 12 boys born into the family. Thomas agreed to come down to the station for an interview and signed a release so the officers could search his vehicle. Remember, they strongly believed that Rachel had been stabbed to death somewhere else before being dropped off in the street and set on fire, and her skirt and ankle boots and some of her jewelry were missing. Were they, or was blood evidence in Thomas's car? At the station, Detective Arnett read Thomas his rights and told him he was not under arrest. He agreed to talk. The detective asked Thomas to account for his time on Friday night. He told them he'd gotten off work at JRB Company around 3:30 p.m. He went and picked up his daughter Caitlin at Rachel's and took her home and they had a pizza. No, he said he did not have sex with Rachel at this time. This mattered because sperm had been found on vaginal and pubic hair samples collected at Rachel's autopsy. Then Thomas said he and Caitlin went to his girlfriend Diane's house and stayed there until 11 p.m. Then he took Caitlin to his mom Maureen's house and got her settled into bed. He left there at midnight and woke up at 4:30 a.m. for work on Saturday. So Thomas was unaccounted for from midnight until 4:53 a.m., which is the time he punched into work. But the timing didn't really work with the theory the investigators were going on, that Rachel had been left in the street and set on fire after 7:15 a.m. On Saturday, Thomas got off work at noon. Around 4 p.m., he picked up Caitlin from his mom's house and took her home. But no one was at home at Rachel's house. Unbeknownst to Thomas, police were still working to identify the Jane Doe found burning in the street. So Thomas left Caitlin at his sister's and spent the night with his girlfriend. The next morning, Sunday, when he got home, his sister came over and said, "There's something in the paper you need to see. We think it's Rachel." Shelley, Thomas's sister-in-law, was on her way down to the coroner's office. She called and told Thomas it's her. Thomas said he was scared and upset, and he knew the cops would come looking for him. And they did. Thomas readily answered all the investigators' questions about his relationship with Rachel. He said they'd been on and off, and right now they were off. They were separated. The last time they'd spent the night together was about 4 weeks earlier, but they were not a couple. In response to questions from the detectives, Thomas said that he didn't think Rachel would have gotten into a car with a random stranger. He also said she was a scrapper and would fight tooth and nail if she were being attacked. With that, Detective Arnett asked Thomas to take his shirt off. He did, and there wasn't a scratch on him. There was no reason to hold Thomas. He wasn't acting suspicious and was fully cooperative. Detective Arnett's notes say his next step was to check on what time Thomas got into work on Saturday. He also planned to interview the other men Rachel had dated, and they started collecting a list of her male acquaintances, including some men that Thomas named. Detectives were told that Rachel had some kind of relationship with a guy named Mike S. Mike came in for an interview with Detective Arnett and said he took Rachel out a few times after meeting her at the Brooklyn's bar. They went to a movie and went camping, and they used to get together and drink. But he hadn't seen or talked to her for at least 3 weeks. He'd been to her apartment about 6 weeks earlier. He said he quit taking her out because she was way younger than he was, and her boyfriend, Thomas, broke out his windshield. This from the report, quote, "One night she was at the Brooklyns and having words with Tom. She needed a ride home, so I gave her a ride. I didn't know it, but he followed us, came to the door and made a scene, and then laughed. When I left, my windshield was smashed. I'm sure it was him, but I didn't see it." End quote. Mike S. said his alibi for the night of Rachel's murder was he was homesick with his mother and 3 sons. He didn't leave the house until noon on Saturday, and Rachel had been dead for hours by then. They interviewed Rachel's friend Tina S. She said that on Saturday afternoon, before anyone really knew Rachel was missing, 3 guys had come to her house asking for Rachel's address and directions to her place. Kids, before Google Maps, you had to get directions from people or from paper maps, which were a nightmare to fold back up into a neat little rectangle. Anyway, one of these 3 guys was Larry R., who had dated Rachel. Another was named Jimmy L., who was into Rachel. And the third was a guy named Danny, only Danny. Investigators spent a lot of time checking into these guys and trying to figure out who Danny was. They continued to gather a list of the names of a bunch of guys Rachel associated with, and all of these guys had to be checked out. On April 3rd, coroner's investigator Gillespie and Detective Van Horn thoroughly searched Rachel's apartment. Her landlord, Bert Thompson, met them there and told them all about when Thomas had kicked in the door. They collected her address book and journal and didn't find anything in their search that shed light on her murderer's identity. While they were there, they called Thomas and told him he should come pick up clothing for Caitlin. He arrived shortly and, quote, he appeared calm at first and then became nervous. After a short conversation, he said he was aware that we were suspicious of him, end quote. Detective Van Horn admitted to Thomas that this was true. They were suspicious, but that they had checked out his alibi and it appeared to be solid. They had his physical time card showing that he was at work at JBR Company from 4:53 a.m. until 12 noon on March 30th. And it appeared, from the nature of his job, that he could not have left mid-shift to go and dispose of Rachel in the street. Then another potential suspect emerged. A guy named Kevin Kavasik called the Akron police station and requested information about Caitlin, Rachel's daughter. He said he didn't know Rachel or Caitlin, but was a concerned citizen, and he wanted to start a trust fund in Caitlin's name. In fact, Kevin made several calls to the Detective Bureau, including some in which he made suggestions on the best way to solve the crime. Detective Van Horn thought this was strange. This guy admitted he had no connection to Rachel and Caitlin. Why was he so invested in Caitlin's situation? The detective contacted First National Bank Trust Department and spoke with a Robert Bonsack. Robert said that indeed, Kevin Kavasik had started a fund in the name of Caitlin. Kevin had told him that he was an employee of the Akron Fire Department hydrant flushing section, and he had talked with the fireman who had responded to the scene about the victim, and he just wanted to help. Kevin sort of made it out to the bank guy, Robert, that he was the fireman that responded to the scene that day when the body was found. Detective Van Horn noted there were no firemen called to the scene, just one arson investigator. Kevin was inserting himself into the investigation and seemingly showing remorse by setting up a trust fund for Caitlin. It smelled. A run of Kevin's records showed that he had 1 arrest for grand theft and a PCP conviction in Arizona. He was interviewed by Detectives Van Horn and Snyder on April 23rd at his home. Their notes say, quote, he gave the immediate appearance of being overly cooperative, end quote. Kevin had gathered all the newspaper clippings about the crime and published a packet that he distributed to people to try to drum up donations to the trust fund. However, he admitted to contributing none of his own money to the fund. Kevin admitted that he'd gone to the scene on Weller Avenue and viewed the black spot on the pavement where Rachel's body had burned. He stated, quote, he got the chills and felt her spirit, end quote. He admitted to personally searching the North Akron area for possible homicide scenes and making calls with ideas for the investigators, such as they should search the vacant homes in the area as the possible murder site. Quote, he went on to say he did not feel this was a sex crime, but the suspect killed her out of hate for women, end quote. Kevin also said he had been told that Rachel's internal organs, the kidneys and liver, had, quote, exploded from the beating she sustained. The detective's notes observed that these organs were indeed damaged. And in the course of Kevin's job in the fire department hydrant flushing division, he carried wood alcohol in his vehicle, a fire accelerant. That wasn't all. Kevin had actually called Thomas P. on the phone and, quote, got negative feelings when he learned that Rachel had $10,000 in insurance and Thomas would be getting the money. He also called Rachel's mother and told her about the trust fund he was setting up. For her part, she was wary of his motives. The detective's notes remark that Kevin was told by a fellow employee to back off, that he might cause himself to be looked at as a suspect by police. Kevin admitted to the detectives that he assumed he was a suspect. I had a little chuckle about the detective's notes, which said, quote, "We both got the feeling the subject wants to be considered a suspect and enjoyed being interviewed. We made him happy, I guess." Kevin offered to take a polygraph, and I suspect he felt quite important doing so. I don't know what the results were, but he was downgraded as a suspect fairly quickly. The fact was that Kevin didn't kill Rachel. He was just a weirdo whose heart may have been in the right place in collecting money for Caitlin, but who seemed desperate to attract the attention of the investigators looking into Rachel's death. Kevin was all but forgotten when it happened again. On May 4th, 1991, 24-year-old Carol Lutz was found burned to death in the trunk of her incinerated vehicle in Elyria. She had been alive when the car was set ablaze. A man named Daniel Wilson, age 21, was arrested and confessed to the crime. He said he had picked Carol up in a bar in Elyria. She'd offered him a ride home. Then he locked her in the trunk, punched a hole in the gas tank, soaked up gasoline with a blanket, lit it on fire, and threw it in the car. From the trunk, Carol pleaded, "What's going on?" as the flames encroached. Wilson was charged with her murder.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
Let's be honest. Most of us have a love-hate relationship with wired bras. We love the lift, but hate the digging. We love the support, but hate feeling trapped. Well, Knix just changed everything with FreeFlex, a wired bra actually designed to work with your body, not against it. FreeFlex features a revolutionary flexible wire that moves when you move, bends when you bend, and keeps everything exactly where you want it. No poking, no stabbing, no constant readjusting, just freedom to move. It also has a demi-cup shape for a natural lift with a lower neckline that flatters in everything from V-necks to dresses. And because it's from Knix, it's available in sizes for every body. Experience the first wired bra you'll actually want to wear all day. Visit Knix.com for 15% off your order with FreeFlex15. That's KNIX.com, code FreeFlex15 for 15% off. Knix.com.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
On May 11th, Akron PD Lieutenant Jay Bosco received a telephone call from a woman named Darlene L. Darlene said she had information about a Daniel E. Wilson, whom she had worked with. Lieutenant Bosco dispatched Detective Snyder to interview Darlene at her job as assistant manager at the Gastown station at Fish Creek Road in Stowe, Ohio. Akron police were already on to Wilson. When news of Carol Lutz's murder came across the wires on May 7th, they went to Elyria to compare notes with investigators there about the two murders, Carol's and Rachel's, which were only about 40 miles and a month apart. Then Daniel Wilson was arrested, and the APD discovered Wilson had previously lived in Akron. The tipster, Darlene, reported that Wilson had worked at the Gastown station in Stowe for about a year. He'd been fired earlier in 1991, but had randomly shown up at the gas station around 6 a.m. on the morning of March 30th, 1991, the day Rachel was killed. He was driving a blue Chevette. He spoke with Darlene, and she said he looked and acted drunk and was very strange. She saw him again on May 4th, and this time he was driving a beat-up Olds Cutlass, the same type of car Lisa thought she saw in the Dairy Mart parking lot on the night Rachel was abducted. May 4th. What was significant about that date? It was the day Carol Lutz was abducted and killed. Wilson had stopped by the same gas station on the days of both murders. Wilson had quite a history. At age 14, he'd been found guilty of manslaughter in the death of an 81-year-old man, Frank Sebula. Frank had employed Wilson to mow his lawn and do odd jobs around the house. On January 6, 1984, Wilson knocked on Frank's door wearing a ski mask and demanded money. He then entered the home and charged Frank, knocking him down and hitting him on the head with a telephone and a wooden candlestick. He then hit him with a metal desk drawer and ransacked the house. Frank died a week later. Because he was only 14, Wilson couldn't be tried as an adult, but he spent 2 years in the custody of the Ohio Youth Commission where he was treated for alcohol abuse. And now, with the statements from Darlene, Wilson was placed in the area where Rachel had been killed on the date she was abducted. Very suspiciously, he had moved from Kent back to Elyria the day after Rachel was killed. Daniel Wilson became the prime suspect in the murder of Rachael Johnson. While some women who knew Wilson described him as a real sweetheart, others described him as a troubled youth with very serious anger issues. One teacher said of him, you could see the anger burning in his eyes. Wilson was also looked at in the murder of Elaine Graham, who had been found burned to death in a car in Goga County on November 14th. Elaine and Wilson both attended Kent State in the late 1980s. The Akron police were circumspect about Wilson being their best suspect in Rachel's murder. APD Chief of Detectives Major Leonard Strauderman told the Akron Beacon Journal, quote, "Wilson is our only good suspect. If it's not him, we're back to square one." Wilson had denied killing Rachel, but the APD preferred a scientific method to definitively rule him in or out. They believed that Rachel's killer had raped her based on the injuries to her genital area. They had his semen on the forensic samples, and they now had new DNA testing that could provide the answers. Major Strauderman said, quote, "Our case will rise or fall with the DNA test," end quote. Wilson was required to give a blood sample, and it and some of the samples from Rachel were hand-delivered to the FBI's Scientific Analysis Section in Washington, D.C. on May 21st. However, that lab was dealing with more than 1,000 requests for DNA tests, and because DNA testing was so new, the FBI had trained only 10 analysts to conduct DNA testing, so it was going to take a while. Well, it took until February 19, 1992, and then the FBI reported their tests were inconclusive. They could not definitively link Wilson to Rachel's murder. Detectives said that while they had circumstantial evidence that Wilson did it, they didn't have enough to charge him. He was termed no longer an official suspect. What that meant was they had no suspect in Rachel's murder officially. But the investigators who originally worked the case thought that while Wilson wasn't the contributor of the DNA, perhaps, he had been just one of a group of men who had attacked Rachel. But the investigators who originally worked the case thought that while Wilson maybe wasn't the contributor of the DNA, perhaps he had been just one of a group of men who had attacked Rachel. He wasn't ever permanently scratched off the list. In March 1992, Wilson was convicted of Carol Lutz's murder, along with aggravated arson and kidnapping. The jury recommended death. It took the state of Ohio until June 2009 to carry out the execution. Finally, the governor denied clemency and the U.S. Supreme Court denied his appeal. Wilson's last meal was a porterhouse steak, corn on the cob, a baked potato, dinner rolls, Dr. Pepper, strawberry cheesecake, and Cool Ranch Doritos. Carol Lutz's mother witnessed his execution, before which Wilson apologized for what he had done. Okay, back to Rachel's case, which, as the investigators indicated, was back to square one. The reality was the police never had a good suspect in this case other than Wilson, because of the similarities in the crimes, and other than Thomas, Rachel's ex. As we've seen in so many episodes, all signs pointed to the victim's abusive, hot-headed, and temperamental former husband or boyfriend. But police verified that Thomas was indeed at work on Saturday morning, March 30th, 1991, from 4:53 a.m. until noon. Based on the statements of the witnesses who were certain Rachel's body was not burning in the street before 7:15 a.m., it could not have been Thomas who dumped her there. I'll bet he was never so glad to have had to be at work at 4:30 a.m. on a Saturday as he was when the police came knocking on his door. And other than Wilson and Thomas, no one else the detective spoke to elicited suspicion or had motive to harm Rachel. Theories that Rachel was a victim of a serial killer who roamed the nation killing women and setting them afire were considered. Detectives started investigating whether Rachel's case could be related to some other cases that had been brought to their attention in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Chardon, Ohio, Elyria, Ohio, Ontario, Canada, and even California. Those female victims had also been burned and some of them stabbed, in cases in which a sadistic killer inflicted incomprehensible pain on his victims. One of these was 33-year-old Glyceria Abram of Elyria, who left her home on foot to go to the grocery store around 10 p.m. on October 25, 1991. She was found on November 29th, partially burned and submerged in a shallow creek beneath a bridge in Medina County. Her cause of death couldn't be determined. Another was 22-year-old Catherine Corkery of Dormant, a suburb of Pittsburgh. Her burned body was found on the morning of July 22, 1989, in a backyard. She'd been beaten, slashed, strangled, stabbed, and sexually assaulted. She was last seen around 2 a.m. the night before. According to the Akron Beacon-Journal expose on all these cases, all of these murders, including Rachael Johnson's, occurred on weekends. Soon, there was another one. In June 1993, a 24-year-old Canton woman named Christina Lynn Warrens was found naked, strangled, and burned on a gravel road in Pike Township. Like Rachel, she was found around 7 a.m. by a motorist who thought she was a mannequin. Like Rachel, she'd been dumped in a roadway and deliberately set on fire. Like Rachel, she was a mother to a young child. Unlike Rachel, Christina was working as a sex worker who had been arrested 10 times for solicitation. As far as I know, her case remains unsolved, and police eventually moved away from a connection with Rachel's. This wasn't Wilson, by the way. He was already in prison. The cops made 2 sketches of men seen in the area, but no one was ever arrested. Rachel's case was also considered possibly linked to the so-called Goodyear Heights rapist. This was a rapist who struck repeatedly in the Goodyear Heights area where Rachel was killed, starting in 1981, committing 11 rapes and attempting 11 more. His rape spree continued for more than a decade, culminating in attacks in the early 90s. David Allen Bellamy was finally apprehended in 1995, and detectives noted with great interest that Bellamy, a metal worker, had worked with someone in Rachel's family. But Bellamy confessed to his crimes, saying he was glad he'd finally been stopped by law enforcement, but he didn't confess to Rachel's. Her case stalled. Police reviewed it every 6 to 8 weeks, but there was just nothing new. Time ticked by.
When you're in HR, it can feel like nothing is easy. From payroll to PTO, from onboarding to benefits, and everything in between. It's a constant juggle of tasks, systems, and spreadsheets. But your HR software? That's the easy part. Meet Bamboo HR. Trusted by over 34,000 companies, it handles all your HR tasks, payroll, benefits, and time tracking, so your team and your company can grow as fast as, well, Bamboo. And Bamboo HR software is actually easy to use. One simple system that pulls all your people data together in one place, so you can ditch scattered systems and wasted hours on tasks that should only take minutes. Because when HR is easier, you can focus on what matters most, your people. HR is hard. Bamboo HR is easy. Ready to simplify all your HR tasks? For a limited time, get a $100 Visa gift card when you complete a free demo at bamboohr.com/gift card. Again, that's bamboohr.com/gift card. Terms and conditions apply.
For period protection you can put on and forget about, nothing beats Knix leak-proof underwear. North America's #1 leak-proof underwear brand. Let's face it, life can be unpredictable, but your leak-proof underwear shouldn't be. That's why millions of people choose Knix. For periods, for light leaks, for everyday freshness. Knix undies are super comfy, super absorbent, and made to handle whatever your day throws at you. Day 2 of your period? Covered. Your daily run? No problem. That big sneeze? You know the one. Yep, we've got you. And with styles like bikinis, boy shorts, thongs, and high-rise, plus sizes from extra small to 4XL, Knix makes it easy to find your perfect fit. Say goodbye to stress and leaks, and say hello to undies that work just as hard as you do, no matter the leak. Find the style and level of protection you want at Knix.com and use code FLOW15 for 15% off. That's KNIX.com, code FLOW15 for 15% off. Knix, for your leaks, for your life.
So you want to start a business? You might think you need a team of people and fancy tech skills, but listen to me when I say you don't. You just need GoDaddy Aero. I'm Walton Goggins, an actor, and I like the sound of starting my own business, Walton Goggins Goggle Glasses. But I couldn't do this on my own. GoDaddy Aero uses AI to create everything you need to grow a business. It'll make you a unique logo. It'll create a custom website. It'll write social posts for you and even set you up with a social media calendar. How cool is that? Well, listen to this. For a limited time, you can get Aero All Access for just $1 a week for 12 weeks. We're talking all the AI power of GoDaddy Aero plus a domain, e-commerce store, payments, professional email, a unified inbox, all for less money than I spend on deep tanning lotion while sunbathing off the Amalfi Coast. You know what that sounds like? A plan. Get started at GoDaddy.com. Terms apply.
In November 1994, Akron detectives came across some possible information on the Johnson case. Detective Snyder got a call from Detective Park, who was interviewing 23-year-old Richard Eugene H. Richard had come into the police department distraught and threatening to harm himself. He told a story that a few years earlier, some buddies had come to his house and told him to come along with them and bring a knife. They drove to a location and a woman Rick didn't know greeted him. His buddies told him to stay in the car, and he felt something violent happen on the rear of the Monte Carlo that caused it to move up and down as if someone was having sex on the trunk, and then he saw some flames out the back window. He passed out after that because one of the guys entered the car and jabbed him with a needle. He woke up on his own front lawn with blood on his clothes and hands. He threw his clothes out and washed up and didn't tell anyone. Of course, from the detective's perspective, it was hard to know how seriously to take this story. Rick denied doing drugs, but had described being drugged, so who knows how much of this was made up, imagined, fantasized, or just plain lies. But then Rick was able to drive detectives to the spot where he claimed this happened. He didn't recall the street names, but he knew how to get to it. Detective Snyder's report says, quote, the location he indicated was exactly where Johnson's body was found. In short, the investigators followed up on this lead by interviewing Richard's parents and brother. They learned that he suffered from mental illness that had surged 2 years earlier. The family owned a hair salon near where Rachel had been found, and Richard had likely heard the story in the news and internalized it. A search of Richard's room turned up nothing, and the lead evaporated. At some point in this time period, work was done to try to determine the exact nature of the accelerant that had been used on Rachel. Samples were sent to chemists at Goodyear, who figured out through tests that it was a liquid solvent containing paint thinner called toluene that was often used in the printing industry. This told the investigators that the guy seen at the gas station way back in 1991 buying just over a gallon of gas was not their guy. But who was their guy? The Akron Police Department renewed their investigation of Rachel's case in 2005. Detective James Pashilich started reviewing the case file in August of that year and recognized that DNA from Rachel's case had never been entered into CODIS. The Akron detective determined that his department still had a slide containing a smear from a pubic hair collected from Rachel's person at her autopsy. Sperm had been detected on the slide. Also in evidence was a vaginal swab on which semen had been identified by the FBI lab way back in 1992. The BCI had received grant money for additional testing on cold cases in which DNA evidence existed, and Rachel's case fit the bill. Detective Pashilich contacted the BCI, and in October and December 2005, submitted the following items to the BCI lab: known standards for Rachael, an envelope containing pubic hair, nail clippings, fibers, and hair recovered from Rachael's person, a brown envelope containing additional vaginal, oral, and rectal swabs from Rachael, and a brown paper bag containing miscellaneous DNA evidence returned from the FBI back in 1992 with regards to Rachael's case. On January 13, 2006, Stacey Violi of the Summit County Prosecutor's Office notified the detective that a complete male DNA profile had been obtained from the items in evidence. The profile had been submitted into CODIS, and no hits had been obtained. It was time to dig deeper. Detective Pashilich started contacting people in the case file. He told them that they were investigating Rachael's case anew and requested DNA samples. This included Rachael's ex Thomas, whom Detective Pashilich went to visit to ask him for a DNA sample that could clear him once and for all. Thomas gave one, and it didn't match. He talked to the bouncer with whom Rachael had been flirting that night, Lee Paul. He gave DNA, not him. He talked to Mike S., who had casually dated Rachael, not him, and on and on. Over the next several years, the detective's file notes say simply, worked on identifying and locating males who were spoken with in this investigation. Will attempt to make contact with these males and collect known DNA samples from each to be tested against the unknown male profile obtained. Sometimes these DNA collections required field trips. Detective Pashilich told me he traveled all over, knocking on doors and asking for DNA. In August 2007, he tracked down the widow of Kevin Kavasik. You'll recall that Kevin was the guy who made himself a suspect by inserting himself into the investigation and setting up a trust fund for Caitlin. Kevin was deceased and had been cremated, but he had never been officially cleared in the case. His wife, Marjorie, put Detective Pashilich in touch with a direct relative of Kevin's, his brother, who lived in upstate New York. Detective Pashilich contacted him, and he said he would be willing to give a DNA sample. Detective Steve Warner of the Schenectady, New York PD went to obtain a buccal swab from Kevin's brother. The lab determined that based on the test, Kevin could not have killed Rachael. In March 2008, Detective Pashilich located and collected a buccal swab from a guy whose name I'm not revealing, but he worked for the county prosecutor's office. He was not a suspect, but his brother Michael McSee was the guy who had found Rachael and called 911 back in 1991. Michael was deceased. Prosecutor Guy's DNA ruled out Michael, his brother, as the suspect as well. In October 2008, Detective Pashilich contacted a guy in Kentucky who had lived in the Akron area at the time of the murder and was mentioned in the case file because he had spoken with someone Rachael knew right after the homicide, and they noticed he had scratches on his arms. He agreed to give a DNA sample too. Detective Pashilich went to the Bluegrass State and collected from him. Nope, not him. Someone in the investigation has to be the right person, Detective Pashilich told me the thinking was. In other words, the detectives knew that they had a good chance of solving the case by matching the unknown suspect's DNA to someone in the case file. They continued to operate on the theory that Rachael knew her attacker. Remember, the belief was that she had gotten into the car with someone she knew. Detective Pashilich dug deep in the case file, listing all men who were even whispered to have known or dated Rachael. At some point, he decided that he also needed to talk to the women in Rachael's life to make sure he was covering all the males she knew or had contact with. His report repeats multiple times, quote, worked on identifying and locating females and friends of Rachael's who were spoken with during the course of the investigation. For this purpose, he re-interviewed Rachael's friends and family, including her friends Tina, Lisa, Tammy, Teresa, Thomas's sisters, and so on. He continued to track down any names he was given, finding everyone cooperative except two brothers. One name that had been repeated throughout the case file was the name Danny, but there was more than one Danny, and some witnesses weren't sure of these Danny's last names. Anyway, the detective located a Danny M. who knew Rachael and asked him for a DNA sample, and he refused. This was suspicious because this Danny had owned a roofing company that was located on Weller Avenue where Rachael was dumped and set on fire. Eager to progress the case, Detective Pashilich sought out this Danny's brother, Michael, who also refused to give a DNA sample. Detective Pashilich told me that of all the guys he came across, these two raised his suspicions the most, not only because they refused to give DNA, but because they both had a direct connection to the crime scene location, and they probably would have used or had access to toluene, the accelerant, in their roofing business. Without a consensual DNA sample and no probable cause to collect one, he had no way to clear them. Detective Pasilich collected consensual DNA samples from between 20 and 30 people in the course of this reinvestigative push. But the DNA from none of these men matched the samples in evidence. Whoever this guy was, it was appearing less and less likely that he was in the case file. Maybe the theory that Rachael had known her killer had taken them down the wrong road. In September of 2012, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine announced the Ohio Unsolved Homicides Initiative, a push to share information and gather tips on the approximately 5,000 unsolved murders in the Buckeye State. The state painstakingly established a database of the unsolved cases. In a February 2013 news release, DeWine said, "Right now there are more than 1,800 cases listed in the database." One of the cases that was featured in a publicity campaign for the initiative was Rachael's. DeWine's office issued a press release giving details about the murder. It cited a number of people involved in the case, including Rachael's stepmother, June Johnson. She was quoted as saying, "The person who killed Rachael robbed her daughter of her mother. We tried to fill in, but you can't fill that kind of void. It hasn't been easy. And no matter what you do, there is always that emptiness. We never thought that 23 years later, we would still be wondering." Detective James Pasilich said in the release, quote, "We do have DNA evidence in this case, and we have tested dozens of possible suspects, but we have not yet found a match. We believe the person who committed this horrific crime is still out there and may have talked with someone about the crime." Governor DeWine concluded, quote, "Too many crimes like these go unsolved each year, leaving too many children to grow up without a parent and without answers. It is never too late to contact police with information, even if the crime happened 2 decades ago." Fox 8 Cleveland covered the 2013 press release as well. The station interviewed June, Rachael's stepmom. She said, quote, "The family, the daughter, the grandkids, we all deserve to know what happened and have closure. When you lose your child, you have this empty hole in your heart, and you think of her every day. And when you look at her daughter and what would have been her grandkids, it's so sad," June told the station. After her mother's murder, Caitlin went to live with her father, Thomas, and grew up in the same area where her mom had been raised. She attended East High School just like her mom. She never really knew what happened to her mother, just that she'd been killed, until she Googled the case as a young adult. By that point, the family was sort of resigned to never knowing who had taken Rachael from them, but they still held on to a shred of hope that someday they'd have answers. Unfortunately, the press release did not inspire the person who had killed Rachael to come forward. The investigation didn't have any new leads to work until 2016, when a Dayton hospital patient named Donald told a nurse he had killed a girl named Rachael. This guy was on his deathbed, literally, so it was deemed worthwhile to test his DNA expeditiously. So they dispatched a Dayton Police Department officer from the homicide unit to go obtain buccal swabs on August 4th, and they interviewed his estranged wife. It all came to naught when the DNA didn't match. This is the end of Part 1 of the Rachael Johnson case. Part 2 is available right now.